Welcome back, as I scratch my eye, to the Rhetoric Warriors podcast. We are the only podcast out there that's teaching ethical-only persuasion to the world. Complicated times require sophisticated techniques. So let's get some rhetoricians on these big issues and see what they have to say. I think they often have to say a lot. I have a lot of different types of people on the podcast, a big range of rhetoric warriors out there, even the people who don't think they're actually in terms of themselves as rhetoricians. But it really hits home when you find somebody that is out there fighting in the real world for real causes by using real talk. And I met my guest here today a couple weeks ago on Lunch Club, and I just thought it was really interesting, the stuff that he's doing. So we're gonna talk today to a guy who has learned to advocate for families of kids with learning disabilities because he had a child with learning disabilities. And now he has advice for other people for how to get through the system. From British Columbia, Mark Smeets.
Thank you very much. And yeah, not just learning disabilities, but disabilities in general, for that matter. Maybe I should do just a little about me, I guess.
Yeah, intro yourself a little bit, Mark.
So my name is obviously Mark Smeets. I am an advocate, podcaster. I'm passionate about basically removing barriers for others through creating those strength-based connections and problem solving. And for us, this journey started when my son was born 9 years ago now, because he'll be 10 in January, so 9.5 years or whatever, but or 9 and 60% years. But when he was born, we didn't know a thing about ADHD or autism. And we began to learn the hard way without any supports of how we were supposed to take care of our son. And that was really hard, because a lot of the time we were told, because he wasn't your stereotypical visibly autistic kid who's regulating in some way or stimming in some way, you're like, well, he looks quote unquote normal. No, there's something else there. Anyways, when he was 4.5, we went for our original autism diagnosis with a private provider, and that's a whole other discussion. But we came away with ADHD, and my wife and I are like, what the hell? But we had to wait another 5 years until April of this year, because of the way the public system is up here. It's just messed up, to get his autism diagnosis. But in order to do that and to really sink the point home, the doctor that we got to see, I put together this spreadsheet of all of his traits that I could think of from birth to now. And my wife and I did this together. And the spreadsheet ended up being about 300 rows. So I took it directly out of the diagnostic manual, which is how you diagnose these things. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not. But I put a little graph in there with it to show where the breakdown was. And my wife also wrote, we wrote another, God, it must have been like 30 pages between the two of us. She wrote like another 14 pages of notes that I had missed in the spreadsheet. So I'm more comfortable with spreadsheets and data than she is. Anyways, when the doctor saw it, the doctor thought his staff put it together, and my wife points at me and she's like, no, that was Mark that did that. And he was just floored. So the advocating piece really happened because of the issues and barriers that we came up against as a family to help him. And the way that I look at it, and you and I didn't talk about this on the Lunch Club call, but there's one of my second favorite podcast, actually third favorite podcast, because yours obviously is number one, mine's number two.
Sure.
But there's a great podcast called The Rock on Tours, and that's all about storytelling in the rock world with Guy Pratt and Gary. I forgot the guy from Spandau Ballet. Anyways, awesome stories. But I came up with the idea of doing the advocate tours. So in the podcast side of things, I've got We Are the ADHD Family. But when I interview other advocators or other parents that are going through similar things, to me, they are the advocateurs. They are the storytellers of their journey. And that's what, that's sort of what's led to a lot of this stuff right now.
Yeah, so a lot there, right? I mean, you're talking about a lot of years, you're talking about a lot of life lived, you're talking about a lot of coming up against different systems and trying to get the support of the medical versus, the education.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot to unpack when you look back at what somebody's gone through with any kind of issue that they're trying to do education and, some type of persuasion about. So what's your son like? It's an interesting issue, just starting off with, what is a diagnosis a good thing or a bad thing? Because a lot of people I know look at a diagnosis as, oh, now it's settled, this is exactly who you are, and it becomes your identity. And that's problematic in some ways. But on the other hand, if you don't have a diagnosis, institutions don't know what to do with you.
And that's so I'm going to answer that in two ways. Actually, I'm not sure if it'll be two ways. It might be 10 ways at this point. So I should also just declare that my ADHD brain, because I do have my diagnosis, I got mine at 46 or whatever it was. If I rabbit hole, got to pull me back.
I will do it. I will pull you. I'll pull all rabbits out of all rabbit holes.
It's hilarious when I sit there and try to do that. I'm going to give you the short answer. To me personally, it's a good thing. The bad thing ends up being because of the way that our system works up here, at least in BC. And it's too hard for me to speak to sort of what goes on in the States. But if you want to get any sort of funding or anything like that, to get, access for going to therapy, or you want to go get a tutor or something like this, then you need an autism diagnosis. And the way the system has worked and the way it's been set up is basically this, I don't want to say it's a two-tiered system between private and public, but you're getting access to money and funds because of the autism diagnosis. And that's a pain in the butt. It's not right, because you have so many other diagnoses that are out there, whether it's Down syndrome, ADHD, dyslexia, complex kids that have more than one physical need, could be life-sustaining therapy or whatnot. You have that group that's left out. What makes autism any more worthy than the other ones? And therein lies the problem. So there's a specific reason why autism's funded in this province, and it had to do with a lawsuit. And I think it was called the Otten case, where a group of families had a lawyer. They took the province to court, sued them, and that's how people were able to get funding for if you get an autism diagnosis. Anyways,
right. So there are already grooves for all this stuff.
Yeah.
They've already been bulldozed. These are the ways that these things move through these systems, and you have to match up to what the system expects.
Yeah. The other side I think you're hitting on, though, is, you've got the stigma side of things where, you don't look like you have a disability, which is harmful in itself. But when you're...
We've got a jackhammer next door. Can you hear that?
No, I cannot hear the jackhammer next door.
All right, good. Well, we'll see.
I got a snoring cat next to me, and you can't hear that, thankfully.
We'll see if the podcast people can hear it, but that's what it is. If you're curious, a little bit of jackhammering around here.
But the bad part, like I said, it's the stigmas that are dictating government policy and dictating other policies within school districts and such. So, you don't look like you have a disability, so you don't need anything. Oh, you have high support. You have, you're high functioning. You don't need anything. Well, no, people struggle. It's not the gatekeeping that happens as a result is its own problem. And fortunately, there are people that I see that are recognizing that, and I think change is slowly sort of starting to come. But ADHD is part of my identity. So if I look at just myself for an example, if I think of what I've done in previous jobs, the spreadsheet thing that I did for my son when we went to the doctor's appointment, I've automated order entry in old jobs that I've done, and which was not even my job to sit there and do. I was supposed to be moving freight, but I automated order entry, and instead of taking 5 minutes to do an order, it took 15 seconds. But that's part of the way my brain works, because I make these weird freaking connections that it's like, I should try this. And all of a sudden, you're knee deep in a macro programming it. It's got nothing to do with the fact that I knew programming. It just has to do with the fact that my brain connects things faster than most. And that's why somebody like Ned Hallowell, especially because he's one of the foremost experts on ADHD, he'll be like, you've got a brain with Ferrari brakes, or sorry, you've got a Ferrari brain with bicycle brakes. There's no stopping that stuff.
Yeah, and I think stuff like, so let's start with identity, because identity is one of those rhetorical tools that if you actually start to understand the way it's done in rhetoric, you can sort of see why it's become so powerful in our public discourse, no matter what system you're in right now. And I may have to take a break. Like this is pretty loud. I'll tell you what, let's take a quick break and then I'll come right back. I'm going to pause this.
Sounds good.
Okay, we're back. We'll see. We'll see what these guys are going to do next door.
This episode is titled The Jackhammer.
There's always something going on around here. I live right on the beach, and it's like all these homes right on top of each other. So people are always scraping something off and building a new $5 million building. So, okay. So yes, we were talking about identity and how identity works out in rhetoric. It's one of the core areas that you look at, like who are the interactants in any situation, and they all have negatives and positives. They all have assets, liabilities, and deficits to work with. And if you can get your character into the right slot, like you're sort of saying, then people treat you in one way because they see this identity in you. Mm-hmm. But you're always competing against other identities. People are always trying to change your identity. It's one of those locations that you kind of have to do a rhetorical struggle to hold on to the definition power for your own identity. It sounds like with your kid, and even with you, like the idea of an ADHD diagnosis doesn't sound as strong as like an autistic diagnosis to people.
Well, and therein, I think in that last little sentence, you just hit something. I think that's really, it kind of proves the point I was saying earlier, is that because you're autistic doesn't make you, like, a disability is not a sign of intelligence. Right. So if someone's non-speaking, they may have a very much different way of expressing themselves, and maybe they can only use typing. That doesn't devalue the ideas they have in their head or something like that.
Stephen Hawking's, right? I mean,
exactly. But what you're bringing up is something that I struggled with up until my diagnosis came through, and I went from, like, I started off as a kid in web design and programming. I did a little stint in politics and helping out in there in some things. Did some works with unions and the website stuff. But because I wasn't who I am now, me being that outgoing personality, very talkative person, the most you would have gotten me being actively talking on something probably would have been about Iron Maiden and music in general. So like, I wasn't comfortable with something like this at all. But as I fell into other areas and other things, that began to change because I began to have other outlets for all the ideas that I did have. So when I got into logistics, the ideas of connecting different systems together began to really come into play. And when our son was born, again, that was another change that kind of not forced is the wrong word. It's something where I wasn't happy in that old life. I felt like I was denying a part of me where I couldn't go in this direction or that direction or this or whatever. And that's kind of where I'm happiest, when I'm, I'm upstairs with this VP, and then up talking to this person on the floor doing the work. And then I'm over here, and then I'm figuring this out. That's just where I sort of go. But the social justice side of me, I'd put off in general in my life, I think, for far too long. So
Well, and think about it this way, because I think it's really an interesting point that you make. So a lot of people will run this off into, like, there are more traditionally positive descriptions of your brain, right?
yeah,
You're an engineer type, you're a
yeah,
systems type,
yeah,
you're very attention to detail type, accountant
yeah.
type, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Versus the identity of ADHD, which is like you said, it's a lighter disability, if you call it a disability at all. But it's the
It
same
is.
description, the same kind of brain, but
It
it's
is.
negative tinted versus positive tinted.
Well, and actually there's a reason for that too. And I'll back up, because we can't say something's lighter than one or the other. We can't do that. There are people with ADHD who cannot, I don't want to say who cannot function, but they struggle to, if I take something like executive function, the ability to keep yourself organized, the ability to keep yourself on task, there are days when I am completely useless. This is not one of those days, and yay for medication. But there's no light, so to speak. It's everything. There's no hierarchy to a disability. It's all one horizontal field. I it,
Is
it
that, I mean,
affects
that may
it
be true
affects everybody
morally,
differently. What's
right?
that?
That may be true morally and probably ethically and probably even physically, but that's not the way people see it. Like, so
No, it's not.
rhetorically, it's
It's not the
perception.
way people see it at all. And therein that's the exact point. That is the point of view that influences government policies, because they're taking the stereotype, and that is what is being applied to the policy that a government may sit there and decide on. There's the hard part. There's
Yeah,
the
that's
that just
exactly
breaks
right.
me
Right. You
apart.
can't leave it as a stereotype on your side.
No, no,
You've
no,
got to
no.
make
Oh,
it real.
and yeah, and not only that, you have to look at it as it's when groups of people complain, and then they're just set aside, they're poo-pooed, right? Oh, no, no, they're just talking. They're the minority, right? That's it. The other issue that you bring up too, which is I think a fantastic one, is and I'm still grasping the intricacies of this, is the language and the terminology. So most of the way that disabilities are classified, it's done through a medical lens. So there's something that we need to fix about you, Dan, or there's something wrong with you. There's something not quote unquote normal, and as if there is a definition of what normal is. There might be a societal version of what's acceptable, and this is kind of what's quote unquote right morally, but the definition and the terms that get used, it's all this very deficit based language that's there. So for example, if I was doing this on my own podcast yesterday, giving examples, if you look at I don't look at terms of I don't see ADHD or any of the disabilities, for the most part, as deficits. I see them as traits. So if you have someone that's very I don't know, I'll just take myself for an example. If I've got 5 different thoughts going on, oh, I should do this, I'm not scatterbrained. I am I'm trying to make connections. I'm not what's another good word? I am not stubborn. I am persistent. There is that negative connotation that's come because of that medical language that's in there, that it's something that needs to be fixed. Whereas this is just the way my brain's wired, man. And this is just the way genetics work. And that's the negative language, like you were talking about in the beginning, the good or bad thing, that's because it's partly because of that kind of language where you are you're up against the wall, and it's like you haven't even had a chance, and you can't prove how valuable your ideas might be because you have a quote unquote disability and you don't look normal and all that kind of stuff. It's really unfortunate, and much of the medical terminology, and I think even fiscal policies, they're all rooted in most of it's rooted in colonialism and racism, and that's really unfortunate.
Right, but you're going to get, so your ultimate audience. So okay, so rhetoric plays chess, right? It's literally just probably mini chessboards. But what it says, like, okay, first of all, let's talk about, you've got your institutional audience that you're trying to win with, but that's different than your cultural audience. Like you have your people that have some actual experience as in families with learning disabilities, and they're going to hear your message very differently than people who have no experience with it whatsoever, right?
Right.
And so you've got this multiple audience problem to start with. Like, I know, like, the things that you're talking about, like medically, you're going to be given a set of terminologies. Education, government, they're all going to adopt terminologies, and you're going to be fighting those wars probably forever.
Yep.
Because you're trying to humanize it.
Yeah. And
you're trying to bring it back to, hey, these are people who have different approaches, different, physical skills and things like that, but you have to humanize it to win.
You do, and that's something that I try very hard to do when there's something that, because I mean the amount of information I've learned in the past couple of years is ridiculous now. Part of me wonders if I need a psychology degree or something. But the multiple audience thing is, it's very much the, what's the word? This is where the approach of, like, for example, I gave a presentation to the city here in September to bring in to advocate for regular scheduled sensory friendly swim times. For some reason, people in multiple cities in Vancouver thought that offering 1 day a week, which is usually a Sunday, from 8 to 9 a.m. at a swimming pool was somehow acceptable to turn off crappy music in the pool and turn off some lights. But to make that connection, I essentially had to strip away whatever sort of, I guess, preconceived notions that I might have had about them or they may have about a disability, and sort of restate what those things, and almost like restate the problem. And it's kind of hitting the stereotypes head on, but you have to be able to adjust to your audience to when you're trying to make that point, if that is making sense.
Yeah, no, you are dealing with literally like many mega audiences and then micro audiences within those megas.
Yes, and you can't, what's the thing I'm trying to think of? To me, it isn't about me. I'm just trying to take that idea I've got in my head, and how can I convert it to what somebody's going to understand for them? What makes it make sense for them? What's the mechanism that I can use? Is it going to be a humor story, a human story, a something? Where is that going to be? That's where the twist comes in to try and convince people. There are plenty of times where it's going to be completely appropriate to sit there and go onto the steps of the legislature or whatever, or some government building and raise all holy hell. But in this case, right, you're not always doing that. That's the rare instances. For the most part, every conversation you have is no different than you or me. So being open to trying to explain your point of view different ways, I think, is a huge way to tackle that multiple, like the multiple audiences that you have to deal with.
Yeah, and I'm sure when you look at your arsenal of language weapons that you can use, or language tools, if you don't want to be so aggressive, things like storytelling.
Yep.
So that's what it looks like one of your main rhetorical challenges is bringing this alive with stories to give
Yeah.
it a humanism and a reality. So, like we've talked for about 20 minutes or so uh, about your son, but we haven't really brought him to life yet. Like we
Yeah.
haven't really brought your life experience to life yet because we haven't got into stories, you know. And so do a little bit of that for people. Like tell the story of your son and your experience through this a little bit. Like hit us with some of your because I'm sure you've told these a lot.
Well, I have, and you drives my wife nuts, to be honest. um, the the to really, uh, I don't get into the, oh, my son's amazing and all that stuff. My daughter's amazing. Yeah, I mean, they are amazing kids. That, no question about that. For us, our journey started when, um, I mean, really our journey started before he was even born, because we nearly lost him twice. Um, the What really did it for me after he was born was we weren't understanding emotional regulation. We weren't understanding dysregulation. We couldn't understand why, he couldn't go to sleep. Um, why it was practically like he was a light switch. You have to turn those things off. And the night that everything changed was the night that he was 4 years old. Yeah, 4, and he tore apart pretty much half the house. So somebody listening to this might sound like, your kid tore apart the house? Like, what's the big sort of deal? But he was pissed. And so I was about 11:45, 15 minutes to midnight. Here I am in the room. I finally got him in my arms, and I'm rocking him to sleep because he's passed out. And it was in the middle of the room, in the middle of my kitchen, just telling myself, I never want another family to go through this again, to go through the misunderstandings or these kind of things. What do I need to do to change? And it isn't so much anything that my wife and I did per se, but we didn't understand how to communicate with him, much like he didn't have the ability as a 4-year-old to communicate with us like you and I are doing.
Right.
So someone who's limited in that sense, yeah, you're gonna run into those struggles. So from that point on, that's where I began to, I recognized all that energy that he was doing, expelling in terms of running around. Hey, I started running around with him outside, and we would just run all the time. And God, we spent hours doing that. It was the most fun thing ever. We just have races in our complex. Anything I could do to capitalize on what seemed like a negative, and we turned it into a strength. His physicality is one of those amazing strengths that he has. And when he started doing parkour and ninja, back, I think it was about 5-something years old, 5.5, it was just seeing the determination that he had in not giving up. And it was the greatest thing ever. It didn't matter how mad he got, he would always get back up and try again. And that made me so proud of him. And it really helped me bridge that gap of, we're going to break these things down like a typical business problem, and we're going to look at the steps. And that helped getting his mindset into how he can help himself and problem solve better than somebody else. So anytime there's an issue, he typically just breaks the steps down. Our life was like that. When I got into training for my triathlon, he was beside me on the bike trainer, again, taking advantage of his physicality. It was the greatest thing in the world. My daughter joined us as well. It's like, here's, Mackenzie's 6 now, but she wanted to be beside us on the bikes as well, and we'd be biking together on the trainers. Finding those things that may seem like a negative and turn them into the positive is what made our relationship the strongest. And video games, I tell you, people can complain about them all we want. When we started playing Fortnite, his ability to communicate with me verbally and to express what he was feeling inside, I mean, other than frustration that somebody shot him, in the game, that is, the ability to communicate, hey, I'm on this hill and I see somebody over in this direction. Like, those are massive things. And he does have speech challenges. So, that is helping him. Not only are we building the bond between each other, but we are doing it in a really fun way. Teaching him to swim was exactly the same experience. Again, taking advantage of his physicality, he really wanted to learn how to swim. With something like dyspraxia, or developmental coordination disorder, which is something a lot of people who are autistic have. It's basically your lack of motor control skills, gross motor or fine motor. Working him through that in the same problem-solving way that I did everything else with him. And that's what my wife and I would do. That's the kind of kid that he is. It goes far beyond just, he's this energetic little boy. No, he's a smart one. And he's got ideas that are, his brain's just like mine. The ideas do not stop and is the greatest thing in the world. And that's what I'm hoping that I can inspire him to do, because it's taken me 48 years to inspire that within myself. It was because of him that I got to this point. And I want to have that happen for him at a much younger age.
Yeah, so you matched your techniques and the offerings to him, as opposed to what so many systems do, which is, here's the system, do whatever you can, but you've got to adjust to the system.
Exactly. Yep. And there it is. The system's not built for brains like ours. It just doesn't.
It's not. Yeah, it's everybody, I think, acknowledges that education was a bad compromise between, lots of ways to educate, and this is the one we picked. This kind of mass factory system of everybody goes through the same rectangle room.
Everybody sit down. Everybody sit down at your desk, and you're only good if you're not saying anything. Like,
I used to go to my son's school on sports day, which is the only day of the year they acknowledged that they were mainly physical beings, and they would just turn them loose all day long, and they'd set up all these stations to play games outside all day long. It was the only time he liked school, and it's like, yeah, this is the way school should be every day, and then you should take a half-hour break to do a little bit of studying of something and go back to being a physical being. Yeah. So it's really hard when systems aren't set up well, and then you get somebody that can't even, sort of downgrade themselves to fit that system. Then you get that disjuncture. But parents like you and people like advocates and things like that, I think, again, humanize it and give these micro solutions or these strategic solutions to make it less obscure and abstract to people. It's like, oh yeah, this kid's having trouble with language. Physicalize most of your interactions.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think when you look at the way that you're going to, there's a little saying I have, which is a little silly, but how many ways can you figure out to spell the word horse, right? You could write it out. You could use speech to text on your iPhone. You could just type it out on a computer notepad. You could use, you could type it out on your device. You could get some pencils and do, or pencils or objects and draw each of the letters. You could show a picture of a horse that's in a book that might just happen to be on the wall. Like, there's so many different ways to get to the same point. And I think it's a huge, what always gets me is that this is such a business oriented problem. And by that, I mean, we expect people to go into boardrooms and give eloquent speeches or whatever, and talk to CEOs and C-suite people. But for the most part, a lot of the problems aren't found in, a lot of the solutions really aren't found in spreadsheets. They're done by talking to the people doing the work.
Right.
And that's something where, talk about failure of the school system. If you have someone who is dyspraxic and they can't write, and their fine motor skills make it really hard for them to write. What's the difference between writing a number and verbalizing the answer? There is none. It's the same bloody answer. So why do we hold people back in schools and everything else to do that? I think therein lies the major tragedy, and that's where stereotypes sort of come in and hold people back as well, because you have those systems that are governed by rules that are like that.
Yeah, and I launched the podcast by saying in rhetoric, especially for what I'm trying to do with it, it's complex times require sophisticated solutions. Complex people, which almost everybody is, really do require much more sophisticated solutions than, hey, we're classes from 8 to 8:55. We will cover these topics. You will sit there, I will talk, and then you will take a test at some point. It's just not sophisticated enough.
Well, and maybe there's something that I'm oversimplifying, but when I think of solutions to problems, the way that I think of it in my head is, if you have an output that you're looking for, whatever methods I'd have to draw this out to really sit there and get it out there. But whatever methods that you need to output that, why constrain those methods? Whether it's a verbal answer, written answer, something pointing to the answer, something like that. You're just changing the method. You're changing the mode of how that answer is delivered to an audience.
I will say, as a former teacher, the exhaustion level of trying to adjust to, I taught college and I'd have 50 students. And I would tell them at the beginning, here's the reality of the system. There's one of me. I think in a certain way. I communicate in a certain way. There's 50 of you. It's up to you to adjust.
Yeah.
Like, you can come my office hours and I can help you adjust, but I cannot adjust to 50 different people in real time. And I don't even have any information about you. Yeah. So that's the reality of the system. Let's work within it. Yeah. Because it's a limited system, but I'm going to be very upfront about, here's how I do everything. It doesn't work for you, we'll figure out some way for you to adjust, but it's got to be you.
That goes back to what I was saying earlier about, when I did that presentation, I wanted to adjust the way that I approach you, for example, as my teacher, because God knows I've done that a gazillion times, to sit there and say, oh, this is the way that I'm describing something is not landing for some reason. I'm not getting the answer that I want. And there's another tragedy that happens as a result, which is just leaving my mind, damn brain. But it's me adjusting to, that's what it was. It's me adjusting to that audience. And I think not just one problem, just a problem that I think you have in that in that current system, where you're seeing what you lack of in terms of if you have a learning disability, that sort of deficit-based thing. It makes us question our identity, and you don't know how well you can learn. You don't know what position of strength that you can put yourself in to make a difference, to actually do something that you might want to do. Instead, you end up at a job that you may very well hate, and you're not able to bring your best self, because you don't know what strengths you have, because your entire life you've been told, you're the problem, but no one's ever told you what the problem actually is.
Right. And again, I get it from the institutional side that I've had people in class, even at college level, and you could tell, this kid who, really nice guy, I liked him a lot. He's played on the football team, very gregarious. We talk a lot, and he would just do terrible on tests. And finally, I was like, William, what's the deal on these tests? He's like, yeah, I don't really read. I'm like, yeah, that's a problem, huh? I was like, you got to deal with this, man. He's like, I'm not sure. He goes, I don't know if I knew. He ended up playing in the NFL. He was a really good athlete, and he had just kind of gotten by on that. And I'm like, I get it, but this is one of those things that it's effort, especially where you're at with your brain development at this point in life. But I'm like, I can't pass you, because this is a literary based system. He's completely smart enough, So I get it from the institutional side, like making constant adjustments it's a big drain of resources.
Yeah.
Like you need more people, you need tutors, you need all these sort of support staff to get
Yeah.
things adjusted from, here it is, this big blocky way of doing things, and you have these very complicated beings around it. Yeah, you
Yeah.
need people interfacing with
Yeah.
them.
And
Uh,
you need those coaches and tutors to bring out the best of what people see, and how you can turn, the deficit-based language into something that's a strength. And that's the whatchamacallit. I think that's the struggle. That's definitely one of the struggles. The other struggle that I think you highlighted really well too is when you're in that post-secondary college university world. And I know I see this in a lot of the Facebook groups and my own experiences as well, is that, how you were saying it's literary based. The person that you were talking about, my question would be was it the fact that they didn't know how to read, or were they dyslexic? That would be one question.
yeah, right. I mean, there's
Like,
lots of issues there.
there is my issue in the post-secondary world is that you have all these and you have these academics who are chasing one theory that may or may not necessarily be proven, and they've got credentials, but it's not exactly what's the word, the system isn't changing with the times or anything like that. It's still very much stuck in the old ways.
Yeah. Oh, it's a medieval institution.
It is
for sure.
exactly. And I think you said that really well.
And you, as the person representing this medieval institution, and going, oh, well, they're forcing me to teach bigger and bigger classes, and I can only put so much energy into this stuff. And they aren't supporting any of the things that I would do differently. Like there was a point when I was teaching when I stopped requiring books because the students wouldn't read them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. And this was before the internet became, very, very useful for students, and they had all those options. But I would have just done URLs. I started doing some of that, like almost everything that is important to human beings will have a massive online presence and a swirl of, tacticians around it showing you how to do it. And I'm like, that's such a much better way of doing education than even some of the books I assigned were great if you were a reader and you could extract information from printed word. If you weren't, they were just torture.
Yeah. Yeah. The collaboration, I think, is a massive, what's the word? Because I know that's how I am. Reading for me in my brain scares me as it is. But the idea of collaborating and throwing back and forth ideas, that to me is how any workplace should be. That to me is how any family should be. That is what school should be. That is what life should be. It is that collaboration that goes back and forth, and you're trying to sit there and come up with better ideas, or just a better process in general.
So let's go back into your story. So you got your son, he's 4, and you start learning adaptations that seem to be, effective with him. Take us through his progression then through the school system, because I'm sure the school isn't doing what you're doing.
No, well, it's interesting because even the word adaptations, I look at that in terms of, like for physical disabilities, I can use that word. When it comes to everything else, instead of adaptations, I still view it as a negative, but I use accessibility just because it's more neutral. It's like a tool. It is a tool for that matter. When I adapt, or I make or when somebody makes a accommodation to me, it's like, I'm staying at your hotel, sir. Like, I'm not, like, that's not like, no, that accommodation is the wrong word, some crappy language. But through school, this was part of our struggle. He flew under the radar in daycare. He was never a quote unquote problem. And all the issues that happened really happened at home when he didn't have to hide who he was. He didn't have to mask. All the frustration and all the fear came out. That's why that night, he did what he did, because he was completely unloading. It really had nothing to do with me or my wife. It had to do with the fact that as a 4-year-old, he could not process the day the way that you or I could. And when we went through, daycare into kindergarten, we saw the exact same things over and over again. And we would go to his teachers, and I'm the talker. My wife is far more introverted than I am, but we'd be telling him, look for this, look for that. If you see this, then, give us a call, just things to watch for. And quite honestly, we've been very, very, very fortunate to have had some awesome and amazing teachers, and they've paid attention, and they have listened, and they have validated. And if it wasn't for us educating them on our son, we might not have had the autism diagnosis, because they were completely on board and they saw everything that we saw and then some. But therein was a big issue for us, because so many kids, I think the part of the stigma comes into, if you're autistic, you have to be autistic all the time. Well, no, you can mask, you can suppress those natural feelings as much as you want, if you can just figure out how to control those things. But when he's at school, it's usually pretty good. Grade 2 was probably his worst year ever, and I feel horrible for him. But I tell you what, he's in grade 4 this year, and the only reason grade 2 was so bad was because of the social issues that he had more than anything else, of people not understanding his point of view, and he couldn't communicate that the way that he wanted. He really didn't have any friends, so that was heartbreaking. But the fact that he's in grade 4 is a massive milestone for us as a family, because for me, I was held back in grade 3, and I had to repeat that year, just because I was quote unquote different, and my parents didn't know enough to pursue any diagnosis or anything like that. And this is back in the 80s, of course. But to have him in grade 4 this year means a lot, because it's like, he's not going to get held back because of being autistic, or because of ADHD, or because of all these things. He's going to keep up, and we're going to sit there and just work twice as hard with it. Everything else is honest to God. It's finding those strength-based ways for him to learn. And there's a lot of conversations with our teachers of, what are you doing, and how can we change this so it's using a strength that he has? And that's what most of it is. That's the advocate. That's the guts for me of advocating. That's the gears. That's it.
Yeah, it's fascinating, the things you have to be as a parent. They don't tell you. They don't tell you that you got to be a full-time psychologist.
Nope.
Like, I remember my son did not like transitions, and whenever we would go somewhere, everybody else would get out of the car and go in the house, and he would just sit in the car.
Yeah.
Like, all the way back when he was in a car seat, little kid. And I'd come out there and be like, "You ready to come in?" And finally be like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
But that was his thing. And like, it was just kind of amusing. And, if you got frustrated with it, you try to force him out of that, space where he was comfortable. Yeah, you'd had a big meltdown. And what's the point of that? But he was lucky in that he had 2 very educated parents, very adaptable, very, pay attention to what's going on, and don't try to just speed it through because you're under stress and pressure and don't know what else to do. And I see people get overwhelmed by that stuff a lot.
No, I mean, you normalized, you normalized his feelings, and you gave him that space and that respect. And that's something where I think the behavior, speaking of psychologists, the way that our world works with reward charts and behaviorism and all that stuff, that is the worst for a child. Oh, I get a gold star, and all of a sudden you're basing your worth on the amount of gold stars on a piece of paper because you cleaned up your desk or something. Like, what the hell? No, but like, kudos to you, because you gave him that respect for him to work his way through those things. And it's something I don't see I don't see much of in that sense, unfortunately, but it is in some circles. But you try to you just try to educate and just reiterate to people that people have their own way of processing and doing things.
Yeah, and it's, again, I don't hold it against people that do not have sophisticated skills for complex situations.
No.
Most of the time, we are not trained to those. My whole field of rhetoric is highly under distributed in the world. Most people don't get the kind of training, language training that I have, or even somebody with an undergraduate degree that incorporates, some decent rhetoric in it. So I don't expect that of other people, and especially with parents, you're thrown into this situation where this little human being doesn't communicate themselves well. You're just like, why are they doing this? And
Yeah.
it is very frustrating. For me, like the quirkiness, I'm amused by quirkiness, but I'm a comedian too. And so it makes sense that I'm going to enjoy quirkiness. I had people I've known who are just the opposite with their kids. Like they wanted an organized child. They wanted a child that was going towards something. And so quirkiness bothered them.
Well, and I think therein lies something else too. It's that it's what they wanted, right? It's that, I mean, you can sit there and talk about whatever that parent may not have had as a growing up, what they were lacking. But again, it's what they wanted. It's not necessarily what the child may want, or how are we empowering that child to be there, to bring their best self and to bring their best ideas. That in itself is a whole other thing. But I agree with you on, because I think I'm giving the wrong impression on something, is the being free of judgment as a parent as well, and us not being so hard on ourselves. We're all at a different point in our journeys. It's not for me to say that you should parent a different way. But if somebody comes up to me and says, hey, I'm struggling with this part, why is that? Then I think there's something where somebody's asking for help. How can I help that person? And it's not about judgment. It's just about reacting to what that person might be missing. And I I have this habit of simplifying this stuff, but to be honest, it is like, I mean, you've already brought up complex. It is complex. It's not simple. Everybody's different. The way it just breaks down in my head is I try to explain it as simple as I possibly can to somebody who just has absolutely no clue, because that's who I tend to run into most of the time, right?
I think that explanatory rhetoric to people that don't have any of your experience is super important.
Yeah, because I want to be the person that builds that bridge between those two parties that are confused. You've got one group that thinks this, one group that does this, that does another thing, and you're like, how can I be that bridge in between to get that communication, to straighten out that communication? That's how I see myself most of the time.
Yeah, so you are what I always describe as a informal rhetorician. Like you're already figuring these things out, and people are very sophisticated in what they try to figure out. The only difference in what formal rhetoric is like, oh, a lot of this stuff has been studied. Here's a set of strategies and tactics and things that you can just sort of go and look through and go, oh, I haven't thought about using that one. Let me pull that out and drop it into my environment and see if it's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there is that formal side that I do have. The process improvement classes that I've taken, even though they're business oriented, I took a lot of those tools. There's a process improvement tool called a fishbone diagram, and it's used for root cause analysis. Or if anybody actually knows what the fishbone is, they'll also known as a Ishikawa diagram. Anyways, I adapted a lot of these process improvement tools, because that's the way my brain works,
Sure.
into the parent version of it. So instead of looking for like the root cause analysis of why my child is dysregulated, is worked out through this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are thinking tools. Like,
Exactly. And that's where it's like, that's where I absolutely love to sit there and piece those things. So I have come up with all these ridiculous ideas of how to piece those things together. And when you I wrote an article on LinkedIn that did good on that one as well, with demonstrating exactly that. But it's how can you, again, you look at your environment, what's the tool available, how can I adjust that tool to what I need it to be for me, or is there not a way to do it? Sometimes there isn't. But yeah,
yeah, that's one of the reasons why I've always enjoyed working with engineering types and mechanical types, because they will apply tools. They like, there is a rational way through this.
Yeah.
There's other people who worked on this. Let me, use some of their work to try to jump forward in the process. But that there are solutions to things. And if the solution you're trying isn't working, it's like, hey, this plug doesn't fit in here. Well, then quit trying to shove it in there. Change things, get an adapter.
Find an adapter. Well, I wonder why that works. Which end can the adapter go on? Does it have to maybe change out the cable altogether? Who knows?
Which I think is a great model for how, like, social problems and issues between, people that need different adaptations or accommodations or improvements, better systems, all these things that if you sit down and do some intellectual work on it, you can then figure out how do I move this into communication work.
Yeah.
And you can take that out to the world and make actual changes.
Yeah.
I think even the thing that you were talking about earlier, like, hey, if you're experiencing a kid that's having these particular issues, here's one option, try physicality.
Yeah.
And I've seen this by other, like, psychologists. I know a person who worked with the YMCWA camps, and they would have YMCA camps, and they would have like 300 kids for summer camp, but there were always 10 kids who were disrupting everything, making everything really hard, fighting with other kids, all that stuff. So what she did was just had them all identified by the counselors, put them in a group, and took them out and did different stuff that they liked.
Yeah.
And it instantly took the difficult element out of the 300 and gave the 10 an adaptation, a different path that they could enjoy, they could get something from.
Yeah, because God forbid we do what we actually are interested in.
Right. Or what do you want? Just everybody to spend 60% of their energy yelling at these kids who didn't want to be in line and doing this particular thing.
No.
So to me, making adaptations, I think that's I don't apply it to people, but I think in adapting into a system, I always look at it as functional versus dysfunctional. That's one of my major binary splits. Is I don't care. I'm not judging your behavior or your attempt or your strategy. Is it functional to get you what you want?
Yeah.
And if it's not, then it's dysfunctional and you need to stop it.
And I think there's a problem. It's the application of those terms to the words are going to come out right this time. It's the non-human application to a human being. And therein, I think, is where a lot of the hurt feelings happen, and the misunderstanding happens. And why can't you understand this adaptation sort of thing? Well, because I'm not a widget, dude. like none of us are widgets. We're humans. We got a gazillion widgets within our bodies. I think that's one of the big sort of things that gets me more than anything else. It's again, when you remove that human aspect and you forget what a system's really about, it makes it tough, and there's a loss of communication in there, and a loss of quality for that matter too. It makes the system less effective.
Yeah, and I think that's a great rhetorical strategy you just pulled out. Like, teach people to use humanized terms instead of mechanical terms when they're talking about human beings.
Yeah.
Right. The problem becomes like, this is a lot of social issue work has this challenge, very heavy lexicon challenges. Like, you're trying to change lexicon on the fly for people. You're trying to change historical lexicon. You're trying to change out terminologies, and people get exhausted by that very quickly.
Oh yeah.
Because that's a very artificial way to learn and adjust language. I think most people can handle, like, you give them one change to something a month or a week, and it's like, okay, I can handle that one. But the complexity of language work within a lexicon of, here's acceptable lexicon, non-acceptable lexicon, across all these situations, all these individuals, all these groups, it's a very difficult linguistic approach.
Yeah, it is. I would not disagree with you. And there has to be that respect and that boundary of where somebody is with those things. Because as much as I want to, if I see someone that's struggling, and if I could give them my brain and that could help them in that situation, instead of looking at their kid in a negative light, it looks them in a positive light. Yeah, I mean, I probably would give my brain to them. But that's going to kill me. Well, I don't want it. I can't do that. But they're not ready to accept. They may not be in that place to sit there and move forward with all that. And I don't look at this as changing society or something like that. I look at it more as I can only concentrate on one thing at a time. My ADHD brain will tell me that I'm going to concentrate on 5 or 10, but I can only change one person's mind at a time and one issue at a time. And if I get one, damn, okay, that's actually pretty incredible. And I respect that in a massive way, in a very, very massive way.
Yeah, and I move up and down between what I call mega to pico scales all the time. About pico is the very smallest thing that you can do, the very smallest example and application, versus mega, which is like this idea, it's probably a micro or macro idea of, talk to people about people with human terms. Let's all practice that. It doesn't matter exactly what they are. I'm not going to call you out on mistakes, but don't talk about people as if they are like disabled. Is not a human term. Like, abled is not a human term. Like, nobody ever calls you abled.
Yeah.
Oh, you're able. You're awfully abled. No, they say like, you're strong, you're talented, you're fast. All these kind of things that we've used traditionally to talk about human beings. And so, like, finding big strategies to teach people, I think, makes more sense than trying to do pico policing.
On a grander, if you're looking at a larger scale, yes. When I'm one-on-one with my son or my kids or somebody else's kid that I happen to be with, I will go as micro as I possibly can. And it's the only way that that one thing could very well hinge on that family's entire world. And that's really tough for someone who may be in that negative mindset to sit there, or deficit-based mindset, to sit there and look at somebody in a different, more positive way. If I was working with your kid on something, I would be, I'd be trying to figure out what the strengths are and that sort of thing. And I might just say, hey, your son learns really well when he does such and such. And that is a big shift, because as a parent, you're going to sit there and go, how can I adjust for this? How can I support my kid? Or at least hopefully as a parent, that's what you're saying. How can I support them through this? There are other people who come across and they're like, all right, that's the way he learns. What am I supposed to do about it? Like, it's completely on down, right?
It's completely beyond me. I can't turn any dial.
Completely beyond me. I've got no part. No, that's it. And therein is a whole other, I think that's a whole other discussion of when you have people that are sort of disconnected from their kids and stuff and their families, and
right.
That's the journey they've gone through.
it's complicated. People are importing things from their childhoods, their lives, and their relationships, and it's all happening right there in that little crucible of a family.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool that you do this work, though. I think you're coming up with some really strong tactical things that for people. I think you're probably a great advocate for this. You speak well. You're so authentic, and you can tell that you care about this in a lot of different levels. So I really appreciate you doing this work.
Well, and I appreciate the really kind words. It means a lot, and that's what I aim to try and make sure that I do when I'm talking to anybody. It's how can I, it's not. Oh gosh, I don't know how I want to say this. It's not that change is hard. We're just scared to change because we are scared, and we go through that. That's what makes change. That's exactly what makes change hard, is that fear. I'm hoping that, when the more that I talk to people and the more that I do things, that, you can change minds through kindness more than anything else. It's not about changing minds through force or anything like that. You apply, it's one thing I haven't touched on at all. I mean, more than anything, it's the kind way of change, right? You're not going to follow some sort of whatever change model management thing of this is how we make an improvement. No, it's just start off by being kind and trying to see somebody else's point of view, and that's going to go such a long way. And that's what I try to always do. It's trying to listen as much as I possibly can, and just validate everything. But the words you said, it means that means a great deal to sit there and hear those kind of words. So I thank you very much.
Yeah, and like I said, I think you model it well. You model kindness well. You model, compassion about this, and an intellectual view of it. Like, not just, hey, let's be kind and nice to each other, but let's figure out some solutions, some new ideas. Let's take some new approaches. So really good stuff, man. I appreciate you jumping on today. Tell people where they can find you, where they can support you. What do you think? What should they do?
So if you want to follow me, I'd say you can pop on to LinkedIn and look under me. I think I'm under Mr. Mark Smeets. I think I've got the Mr. in there. But I know my profile picture is up there right now. If you want to follow the podcast, it's We Are the ADHD Family, which is on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, which has now gone away. It's something else now. I do YouTube on occasion. But yeah, I mean, that podcast is basically, it's our family's journey with ADHD, autism, and other discoveries along the way. And it's about advocacy. It's about talking to other advocates and being a better advocate. Other than that, if you want to follow some of the work that we do as far as ADHD goes, you can always check out the ADHD Advocacy Society of BC, and that's something where I'm involved with and working with government and our provincial government, that is, on getting ADHDers supports in schools and changing the way that education's looked at. And then there's all the other advocacy stuff with the things that I do. So you'll see my name in the news at some point again for advocacy related things, and for the sensory friendly swim times that I did successfully advocate to the city on. They're actually going to do it starting, I think, in December. So that legitimately happened.
That's awesome, man. Everybody get out there, follow this stuff. Mark has a lot of perspective on it, and it's good of you to share it. Appreciate you jumping on the podcast.
Thank you very much, Dan. Have a good one.
All right, and everybody out there, get out and persuade some people. They need it. Get good at it. We'll see you next time on the Rhetoric Warriors podcast.